Welcome to the Lightwork Women podcast. We are experienced women with credibility. We know what life is like. Transform your life with our top-tier psychic and wellness services. We offer effective solutions tailored to empower you on your journey to spiritual wellness. In this podcast series, we talk about tarot, mediumship, Reiki, mental health, magic, witchcraft, and much, much more. We hope you enjoy our show. Please get a cuppa, have a seat, have a listen. And just remember, many hands make light work. Welcome to another episode of Lightwork Women. In today's episode, we're continuing our story with the goddesses, and I'm joined by the lovely Robyn Ridley from the Goddess Sanctuary. How are you, Robyn?
Well, thank you, Renee.
That's good. And today's episode, where there's going to be a focus on the goddess Juno, and Juno is, known as relationships and marriage and children and lots of other wonderful things we're going to talk about this afternoon. But I'll let Robyn introduce herself and also just kick off, because she is the expert in the goddess, being that she has her goddess sanctuary. And if you want to find out more about Robyn as well, you can visit her official website, robynridley.com. So let's talk, Robyn. Let's talk about Juno.
How exciting. This is really good because this is our third one now, Renee, of our four-part series of the goddesses. And
Yes.
Juno is very dear to my heart, one that I've done a lot of work around this one. And I think, she's Juno in Roman mythology, and in Greek mythology, she's Hera. And I've often referred to Hera. So if I just interchange the two, depending on what we say. I'm so excited to be talking about her, as she is, as Renee said, all those juicy things, and the goddess of marriage, the queen of the heavens, and also a triple moon goddess in her own right, which is wonderful. We'll be talking about astrology a little bit later, where we talk about the rulerships of Libra and Scorpio. So that's an interesting little mix. And then when we see Juno, when you look at some of the beautiful pictures, you'll often see things like her diadem of the crown, a veil down behind her, and she usually has her scepter, her holy cow, which is the holy heifer, which is her cow, peacock or a cuckoo, and a rainbow. So it sort of can depict, I guess, that it is an image of her with some of those things. Now, when we talk about her, we start, I guess, looking at polarities, and we look at the intimacy and the manipulation. So it's a very juicy topic, which I'm looking forward to getting into. But before we do that, she is the divine consort. So she's well known for this. And she's one of the two married women in Olympus. And she is the wife of Zeus or Jupiter, depending on whether you're looking at the Greek or Roman. The loyalty and fidelity were what she was known for. And it's often said that women who follow that road of Juno look at conceiving or bearing powers. Also, the guardian of childbirth and motherhood, as Renee alluded to, the children, and then the feminine principle of the celestial light, and then the birth goddess leading children also into the light. So, but what many of us know her for, and the one that I find really interesting, is her patroness of married women. And it brings with it a whole gamut of that we could talk about and explore today. And when we look at her in relation to reproductive cycles, and she's worshipped in the Roman area with her, in relation to the calendar, and celebrated once a month. I think it's the first day of the lunar month. But so it's interesting. But before we go any further, it's there's so much mythology, and it depends on which one you choose to follow. But I've just written down the brief one that I'm more familiar with. We know that she married Zeus. I'm talking about Hera now. So she married Zeus, and she was standing, and a bird flew into her, and she nurtured the bird and comforted it in her breast. And then when it took shape and it went back to being Zeus, she realized that she had him in her breast. And with that, there was a sense of guilt and obligation to marry him. So this is the mythology that I was used to. There was a wedding ceremony that went for a few years, big celebrations. And in the beginning, there was so much love and tenderness in this relationship. Aside from the transitory sexual ecstasy that was experienced, there was also marital bliss, which faded, over time, or quite rapidly, really. So I think, without going too much more, is there anything you want to talk about at this point, Renee?
There are a few things. I mean, I would be sort of leaning into the Roman aspect of her husband being Jupiter.
Yep.
Um, and he was a bit of a playboy.
Hmm.
And to say that is probably an understatement because Jupiter is all about expression and being the biggest, baddest sort of,
Hmm.
planet there is. But at the same time, guys with, big heads often will go and sort of do what they want to do because they've got a massive ego. And
Yeah.
Jupiter can also indicate that inflation of ego. So that kind of makes sense. But as a result, poor Juno, she, does has a lot of trust issues because of that. When the people are not trustworthy, and that's the flag that she flies. It's all about
Hmm.
fidelity and loyalty in relationships. Um, it leads to conflict, and it can be vengeance against other women who had these affairs with him,
Yes.
and also the myth of the Trojan War, where she supported the Greeks, but was ultimately known for her protective and nurturing qualities as the guardian of marriage. So it's almost like she's you know, almost a little bit like Libra, like when we think of
Hmm.
Libran energy and the goddess Mart. It's sort of that adjudicator of who is worthy of companionship and loyalty and who is not. And if that trust or that, contract is broken, very much Libran energy, like we look at in the tarot, um, that all hell breaks loose. Like she will go in and fight the good fight. But, I've put a note down here as well. She was associated with different festivals such as
Hmm.
Matronalia, sorry, celebrating women and motherhood, emphasizing her role as a nurturing yet formidable goddess. So I think she's quite regal, and she's got a lot of authority, but she's just very powerful when it comes to, the law of marriage and loyalty.
Yeah. I agree. Same with when I would speak of Hera and Zeus, that continued tension and combat that they have between them.
Mm.
And there's also this, like he was said to also punish Hera with like thunderbolts. And, it was sort of like a humiliation that took place. And she couldn't continue to bear his infidelities and arrogance. And there was this sense of punishment toward each other in the
Mm.
relationship because of obviously his behaviour, but also, how that left her feeling. There was a deprivation of sexual coming together, and she was also at one point locked in a chastity belt. So Zeus, I mean, constantly, as with Jupiter, um, that sexual custom and actually embarking on those adventures with goddesses and mortals alike. And Hera's deepest pain was watching this. Like, she found this really difficult. And he was also trying to destroy her goddess and her cults, like her goddesses and cults that followed her. And she was forced into obedience or submission and could only take revenge, like, on his lovers and children. It's interesting because we'll chat more about that in a sec, but Hera ordered death or placed curses on women who betrayed her. So this
Mm.
whole story
Mm,
is
mm, mm,
about
mm.
that betrayal, but it's interesting that she couldn't like the finger wasn't pointed in the right direction. It's like and this happens in real life, doesn't it? Like when there's infidelity and
Yeah,
betrayal, people
yeah.
could cut off, for instance, if it's the same. Rather than saying, well, it's my partner's or my husband's fault or whatever, it's always the other woman's fault. And it's always them that we're ready to tear down. It's
Mm,
like,
mm.
wow. So I think that's why this is an amazing story to talk about because it's very real. And the way that we, she has, I mean, she is known for her fidelity and her loyalty. And that's
Yes.
very impressive. But at
Yeah.
what cost? So I think, Renee, and when I talk about that, I'd love to just quickly mention the triple goddess component in relation to her. Um, well, it's like the maiden, that attracting of the man that is done in her youth. Then she becomes the bride and the wife and the good wife, so to speak. And then thirdly, it's like a widowhood. She separates herself and goes away. And this is how she copes. So she goes away to reinvent herself, if you like, or whatever you want to call it, to come back into this same situation and space. So that's how she sort of gets her reprieve. So, if you look at that like a triple goddess energy, she's using all aspects of her womanhood, if you like. And she can be very much like Venus, like she's right into all the beauty. She is seen to charm men, and if anyone is seen to go near her, well, I know Zeus was very quick to, when you read the mythology, very quick to ensure that didn't happen. Um, so, but she didn't want to anyway. And I think, how you mentioned the Libra,
Mm.
I think that's where this comes in. It's like there's an aspect of her that wants to identify herself through a mate. And this is a Libra
Yeah.
energy, isn't it? It can be very much seeking that perfect or
Yeah.
not so relationship.
Yeah. I think this is sort of where we're sort of now starting to talk about the psychology of her
Mm-hmm.
and how that plays out in relationships and archetypes. Um, that desire for partnership and union, and that deep-seated sort of, loyalty and need for connection,
Yeah.
and also the mutuality, the mutual support is very Libran and very having to find that balance, but also just as women, I think I think one of the biggest sort of pitfalls that some women, not just Librans, but all women can sort of fall into is that balancing the independence and dependence in a marriage or in a relationship, because
Yep.
I remember when I first met my husband, I was like hyper independent. Like he'd never met anyone as independent as me before. And it's like, no, no, I can do this, I can do that. I'm fine on my own. Um,
Mhm.
but then after, say over a decade of partnership or even more, it's about 15 years now, but I became a different person. When you're in a relationship, you soften. You don't have to sort of put up the armor and go out to war and be this kind of Joan of Arc sort of energy. It's more about just softening and
Mhm.
leaning into the dependence a little bit. I struggled with that a lot. I think that the Juno, I mean, my Juno is in the, we'll talk about the astrology later, I guess, but I wasn't used to that. And to have a person that, A, also you could trust. I mean, I had a lot of trust issues. And so being in a marriage and being in a partnership with a new person that's the number one thing. You have to trust the person. If you don't trust them, then you wouldn't share a house with them or your finances or any of those things. You have to trust the person. So there's lots of things about that topic of marriage and partnership which she represents. She represents, finding that balance. But I guess I can sort of understand the way that women will go for the female as opposed to the male if there is if there's infidelity. But as far as I'm concerned, I mean, I'm a Gemini, so I see both sides. I
Mhm.
think, well, it takes two to tango. I'd say,
Absolutely. Yeah.
they can both jump off a cliff. You know what I mean? It's not it's not just the woman and it's not just the male. It's like it's both. You have to have two people involved in that.
Yeah.
So,
Mm.
and I just think, oh yeah, well, the women should know better, but then so should the man. I don't think it's a gender bias. I don't think it should be. Um, one should know better because she's a woman, and the other one should know better because it's the husband. I think they're both adults. you know the you know the difference between right and wrong. But then there's that also that old adage of people who are happy don't stray. And I think if you're in a happy relationship, generally speaking, things should be fine, unless you're married to a complete, nymphomaniac or or whatever.
Oh, that's an interesting one. I think that's a whole discussion in itself, isn't it, really?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, I find that, like you're talking about, that principle of relatedness. So I think it's like finding that interdependence within relationship instead of being, like you say, dependent or independent. But I think it's about our self-expression, and I think finding freedom in that, instead of being bound by someone. Although with the energy that we talk about, there is that need for some people to be identified either through their partner or through their children.
Mm,
Um, but I think when we look at freedom and equality, there's this sense of that's what we're seeking with that Libran energy, as you said. Intimacy and sharing is another aspect of that, and coming to this mutual understanding. And it was interesting because I remember reading about like when you come together, there's two of you coming together, one and one, and when it's like then it's like a transcendence. Then there's a joint energy, that beautiful transcendent energy. It's like the relationship, isn't it? It expands. So that was like you said, it's finding your way from being this and this to being us, or.
yeah,
So, this whole thing with Hera, we look at that principle of relatedness in relation to psychology, but also the pathology in the relationship. So, what is the pathology and how is all this presenting? And we certainly see with her that infidelity, and then, of course, the jealousy that comes with all of that,
mm,
the betrayal, the emotional attachment. There's even possession in some relationships as well. And I think the power games, like there was a bit of and you do see this in that story with Zeus and Hera. There's the withholding of sex, there's the ecstatic sex, there's all of this, which brings in that whole, it's playing games, it's like giving your power away and then claiming it back, if you like. So, and it's that identification that I talked about. And I think the ability to understand that the manipulation, which must be why this was sort of identified with in the beginning with oh was it, yeah, Demetra George, that's right. So I think following on from that, I guess for me, one of the biggest keywords for her is commitment, isn't it? She's just stuck it out. She's
yeah.
stuck out the relationship. But I think there's the occult themes as well, which is where I see that Scorpio energy coming in. So,
Mm,
the occult themes in relation to psychology can be tantric sexuality, can be that soulmate essence, and
mm,
of course the alchemical union. So it can be quite a spiritual relationship between two people. So, and of course, the theme of the transformation in this relationship really is separation and return for both. There's this separation and return, and it's just a continual cycle. So I guess ultimately, when we look at, I'll just quickly talk about sex before we move on, but sex is bliss, obviously, sex as magic, sex as rejuvenation, and then marriage as the alchemical union. So it can present in lots of different ways. And it's like, I really like that because that gives that scorpionic understanding of what could go on in this type of a relationship. Does that make
mm.
sense?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's all it's on every level and how whether or not you're talking, symbolically, zodiacally, energetically, and like hermetically, which is what
Mm,
you've just touched on as well, which is really interesting. And and that shows up as well. I'm going to just mention the tarot because it does. Hermeticism is key to reading tarot in many ways. If you understand, the symbolism of a man and a woman in the
mm,
cards, they represent the masculine and feminine, or the coming together of, the integration of the soul. Like you said, the two people, the two genders, or the two energies, yin and yang. It's just energy at the end of the day. But if that link is jeopardized or compromised or broken, um, I guess that's where Juno kind of comes in and says, "Well, what have you done? Why did you do that?" And I think it's, yeah, you have to take her or leave her because not everybody is interested in commitment. Um,
mm.
and then I
That's
guess
right.
that would play into whether or not you have, depending on where she shows up, for example, in the astrology.
Mm,
um, and what you value in that space and in in that house or in that sign.
mm.
Did you want to move into the astro chat? Have you?
Yeah, I think so. I think really, I mean, other than what we've talked about with Hera and Zeus, she's been identified as the idealized wife, obviously.
Yeah.
Um, and then looking at her with children, now they couldn't have children together, but she did have parthenogenetic children, and obviously he fathered children. So, and then her solitude. So I think the solitude is that coming, that's where she went away to actually, with her wanderings, to bathe in the spring of renewal, I guess, before returning into relationship. So I think going on to the astrology, like you were saying, yeah. Or did you want to mention the tarot cards first? So if we're
Uh,
looking at the two that we're talking about.
I didn't actually bring them into the chat, but I'm going to assume you're going to talk about the Empress.
Oh, I was just going to talk about the Libra and Scorpio, but you
Oh,
talk
yeah.
about what? Yeah, yeah. So with Libra, we're looking at the Justice, and you mentioned that. So it's
Oh,
it's a
okay.
given. That's easy, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And then the Scorpio card, the death. And now that's really interesting. So one could say when she goes away with that solitude, there is a death, there's a dying before
Mm,
she returns for that renewal.
mm,
But also all those things that we talked about are the complexities in relationship in relation to sexual and intimacy and all of those things too. I think that's quite valuable. So what were you going to say? I'd want to hear what you were just about to say.
Oh, I didn't actually. I wasn't going to refer to specific tarot cards. The Libran energy just popped into my head because as I was
Yeah.
sort of
Yeah.
researching this, I thought, well, it just sounds like the Justice card. And
Yeah.
Libra does rule relationships,
Mm,
or cardinal relationships. Having said that, though, Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius all rule relationships, but
I
I
do.
think Libra is particularly, the house of marriage in that seventh house, and
Mm,
um, but the death, I guess, any kind of ending. Um, I mean, depending on how strong a marriage is and whether or not the kind of person is happy to, overlook or move forward in a marriage after any kind of infidelity, that is
yeah.
completely personal and completely, it depends on the person. But there is that trust that's broken, and once that trust is broken, it's a little. I've always sort of described it as like, a vase that might fall to the ground and you can glue it back together, but you can still see the cracks.
Yeah.
It's never
Yeah.
complete as it once was.
Hmm.
So yeah, I think you've got to be a pretty tough cookie in this day and age. And I mean, but infidelity and anything like that's been going on for eons. It's nothing new.
That's right. Nothing new at all. Yeah. So when you talk about astrology, I love the way that we can see how it can affect so many areas of our chart.
Mm,
Like you were
mm,
talking about the one-to-one relationships and, you know, because of all those into relationships, I guess. We're looking at how it can affect in so many ways. And like we've got things like the pathology of relationships can come up and that can affect, where is she's positioned in our chart and how that can play out. That can all affect that sacrifice in our relationships.
mm.
It's interesting because if you start to look at all the aspects, you would see that there are nuances there that can be identified and our fears in relationships, our power in relationships. So I think for me, yeah, where she is. So where is she in your chart?
So I have Juno in my 10th house in
Mm-hmm.
Pisces. So when I did a bit of a deep dive on that, it says that, Juno in the zodiac signs represent, the commitment, the partnership, and the desire for balance.
Mm-hmm.
And its expression obviously depends on which sign it falls in and also potentially the house that it's in. But because mine's in Pisces, it says that I look for romantic, compassionate, and spiritually connected
Mm-hmm.
relationships that value emotional depth. And I would say that that's quite true. But because it's in the 10th house, it also says relationships linked to career, public image, and social standing. So that's kind of weird because I don't think that my husband is anything to do with my career or public image or social standing.
Mm.
So I would probably just lean into more the actual zodiac sign itself. Where's yours?
Mine's actually my fourth house, so it's 15 degrees in Gemini. I have a little cluster down there. I've mentioned this before, or a few
Okay.
goddesses all hanging out, all the asteroids together,
Yeah.
which indicates that I need that verbal stimulation and
Yeah.
exchange in relationship. And
Yeah.
it's interesting when it talks about a lack of that can lead for the seeking of a new mate. So it's
Mm-hmm.
something that's really important, that communication. Um, and it is in my fourth house, so that security, the foundation of my life, and it can also indicate mate as a nurturer as well. So I think, yeah, it's interesting how they're all together. And that's why I'm
Mm-hmm.
thinking with yours, I wonder, I mean, it's something to ponder, but I wonder if there's any aspect there that gives that a bit of a different meaning to where she is in your 10th house. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but if any of the listeners are curious, I do have a quick summary of each one. Do you want me to just quickly,
Yeah, if you want to.
just run down?
Yeah.
So in that way, if the listeners are interested, they can have a look at where their goddess asteroids are. I mean, there are so many asteroids in your chart. If you really want to deep dive, there's like, I reckon there's 100. And there's different kinds of asteroids as well, but we're obviously just focusing on four feminine goddesses. But you can look up all sorts of things, which maybe I might talk about in the future. But for example, if you've got Juno in Aries, you're passionate. You're looking for someone passionate and independent. If it's in Taurus, it's like stability and loyalty. The Gemini, which is that intellectual conversation stimulators. Cancers, they're looking for someone who's nurturing and caring, pretty much aligned with what those signs represent. Um,
Mm,
Leo, if you've got Juno in Leo, you desire admiration and loyalty and the creativity. The Virgo looks for practicality and service in relationships and stability. Libra is that beautiful harmony and fairness. Scorpio is intense and passionate,
mm,
private as well for Scorpio. Sagittarius obviously values freedom and adventure, and obviously someone maybe they like to travel with. Capricorn is commitment, stability, and long term security. Aquarius is the unconventional, intellectual, and freedom loving relationships. And then, as I said with mine, it's that Pisces, romantic, compassionate, and spiritually connected. So it is super interesting. Um, and whether
mm.
or not, do you have any prompts for people who want to get in touch with their Juno, or how you would sort of advise in them looking at next steps in their chart?
I think just a couple of questions is what is it that I seek in relationship?
Mm,
Is a nice basic one.
mm.
And how do I take responsibility to ensure that my needs are met?
Yes, very
Mm,
interesting.
mm.
Well, I love
Because
that.
yeah. Because like you said, with that scenario that we talk about with Hera and Zeus, or Juno and Jupiter, we different women would take that differently,
Yeah.
and different outcomes and different. So I think it's been very clear with our
Mm,
Juno energy, but also understanding those other things like betrayal, and how do we cope with that? How do we feel about that with
mm.
infidelity? All those things is having an understanding that they can be a possibility in relationship. I think we need to take the goggles off and see that these things happen. Yeah. So it gives us
Yes,
permission to talk about that today.
they do. And I mean, look, we've all experienced betrayal on some level within
Mm,
relationships or partnerships. Um, Luckily, that hasn't happened, or I'm not aware of it anyway. Highly doubt it in my actual marriage. But I think for me personally, God forbid, if anything did happen, I don't think it's a negotiable. I don't think it's negotiable. That's just me. How about
mm.
you, Robyn? Are you
Well,
negotiable?
I think that's good that you know that, but I also think it's important for women too to understand that, like, I think for us, it's okay for us to say. when this happens, I'm going to do this, or if that
Sure.
this happens, I'm going to do that. But it's also understanding that it's a whole different ball game when something unfolds. And sometimes I don't think we really know how we would react.
Yeah,
And I
that's
think the
true.
hardest thing is giving up on the judgment of self and others when these things happen. Because, and we can all whip ourselves up enough anyway. We don't need that external, whatever that is. So I think, yeah, I think it's a really difficult thing. And, but I think to know our stance on that and what we would do
Mm.
is a good baseline. Yeah. But it's more important is how do we get our needs met? How do we create these relationships that sing to our soul, come back to that beautiful words that it says, the feminine principle of celestial light. Well, how do you get that? Who am I as a
Yeah.
feminine? Who am I? How do I express that? How do I express my needs? How do I express my beautiful Venus energy? They're very linked, these two.
Yeah.
And
I think that key word that you used earlier about interdependence is
yes,
really important because you can have a relationship that will, stand the test of time, but you also have to be, it's not just two people in a relationship and a codependent situation. I think the relationships that obviously go the distance are the ones who both are equally as connected as they are separate. So
yeah,
if you can coexist as two independent people in the relationship, that is key for me. I mean, I think that's the main thing because if you are reliant on the other person or all the time and that one day partner is not there anymore, whether it be through just the passing of time or other circumstances, you're going to be quite debilitated. And to me, that is not really forward thinking. It's sort of really relying on the
mm,
energy or the dependence of another person to always be there for you. And that's just really unrealistic.
mm,
Um, so it's going to be interesting to see, how things play out in my marriage and then, friends and family. You just hope everyone just has a great life and is happy and um,
mm,
but yeah,
exactly,
to connect with what you want in a relationship, I think is just boils down to communication.
exactly. I
Yeah.
totally agree, Renee.
Keep the lines open.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I've just got a little quote here to finish up talking about
Okay.
Juno or Hera.
Beautiful.
It was said, whilst Hera has traditionally been depicted as the jealous and quarrelsome wife, in reality, she is the image of the turbulent nation princess coerced, but never really subdued by an alien conqueror. I think
Mm.
that's very interesting.
Okay.
Mm. It was like, so it picks up on the quarrelsome and the jealousy, but not all the good, which I think is fascinating. So I thought this is a good quote for thought provoking. It's like, well, who wrote this quote? Like it was in Demetra George's and Douglas Block's book, but who wrote this quote? And then whose stance is being taken? And I just think coerced, not coerced. What is that level of interdependence? And would this have been different if someone else had have written it? It was a bit of a devil's advocate quote, which I
Yeah.
thought, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, that sounds, I think we'll leave it with our listeners to ponder that. And if they have any
Mm,
comments, maybe leave something in the description below and let us know your thoughts on Juno and whether or not you found the podcast interesting and helpful to sort of locate where your Juno or your asteroid is sitting in your natal chart. And are you aligned with the goddess energy of Juno in your expectation of, I don't want to use that word expectation, but your understanding of what will make you happy in relationships and what, is that communicated with a partner if you have a partner. And if not, maybe, have a look at what you're looking for because it's important. If you don't know what you're looking for, it's like anything, you've got to have a bit of a roadmap.
perfect. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you for joining me, Robyn, and thanks for listening, everybody out there. If you're interested in finding out more about Robyn, you can find her at robynridley.com or myself, Renee G, at New Angel Tarot, which is newangeltarot.com. So we're part of that collective Lightwork Women. We're going to be posting this obviously on YouTube here, but also Spotify, Facebook, and Instagram every Saturday morning until further notice. So thanks
Thank
again,
you,
Robyn.
Renee. Thank you, everybody. Yeah.
All right, and we'll see you next time.
Okay, bye.
Bye. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Lightwork Women. If you'd like to find out more about any of the guests on our show and our practitioners, visit our website, lightworkwomen.com. Until next time, thanks for listening.